So any questions, any thoughts that folks had during the break? Yes, sir.
Where did you derive the concepts of attitude and goals?
Yep. His question was, where did I derive the concept of attitudes and goals? Really teaching high school and watching my students and how they were responding to the world. And so that's really when I encapsulated that concept that attitudes are attached directly to goals. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Does this stuff make sense that we talked about earlier? Okay, cool. So there's two parts of culture that I want to talk about, and then we'll start moving into some other pieces. There's the part that you can see, and then there's the part that you can't see. It's pretty simple, huh? Two parts of culture. What are the things that you can see about a culture? What are the parts of a culture that you can see?
The way people dress.
You can see the way people dress, right? So how they dress. What else?
Food.
The food that they eat.
Art.
The art that they have. What kinds of art pieces can you see?
Like a photograph.
Okay, so photograph, maybe paintings,
Sculpture.
jewelry,
Textiles.
textiles, dance.
Language.
Yep, you can see language. By the way, this was the Titanic. It was Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm king of the world! So there are all these things that you can see about a culture. But then there are the aspects of deeper culture, which is why I kind of drew this iceberg, that you can't really see unless you're a part of the culture, or you don't really understand unless you're a part of the culture. And what are the parts of deep culture that only people within that cultural group would understand about the nuances of the group?
Belief.
Okay, so beliefs, okay.
Values.
Values.
Norms.
What's that, norms?
Traditions.
Traditions. Their relationship with God or spirituality. The meaning of life and death.
The roles they play to each other.
Okay, so roles people play, and that can include gender roles, life and death, value, sense of beauty, what's beautiful, right? Because what's beautiful in one culture might not be beautiful in another culture. And these are all deeper things, that these things that we can see, their root is coming from the deeper culture. And so sometimes we say, well, I know about those people because we're familiar with this, but you don't really know me until you're familiar with my deeper culture, what my values are. Why do we do that? Yeah, you know that we do that, but why do we do it? And guess what? I'm not going to tell you unless you're in an authentic relationship with me. And so it becomes important. Because what did the Titanic end? They saw the top of the iceberg, but what ripped the hull of the ship? The bottom, the part that they couldn't see. And so all too often, it's this part that gets us in trouble when we don't understand or try to understand deeper culture. And you can only do that when you're in relationships with folks. So there's that. So I'm going to flip a little bit to larger society, and then we'll come back and talk about goals and approach in just a second. So important dates, and there's a couple other dates I'd like to add. I thought this was the other presentation. So Andre, why do you do this work? What encourages you to do this work? I do this diversity, sensitivity, cultural competence, whatever people want to call it. I do this kind of work because I happen to live in one of the greatest countries on the face of this planet, one of the greatest civilizations that has ever lived. I do. I love this country. And these are some of the reasons that I love it. There's the preamble to the Constitution. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Paragraph 2 of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, and at that time when they wrote men, they meant human beings, because that's how we identify human beings as men. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. His truth is marching on. Right? Love that stuff. Love it. And all too often, I have brothers and sisters who talk about particularly those two pieces, and they said when they wrote the Constitution, they weren't thinking about you. As a black man, they say as a black man that they weren't thinking about you, and I just laughed because I said, well, if they did not want me to believe it, they should have never written it down, and they also should have never taught me to read, because I'm going to hold the United States to this, and because I love her, I can also talk about her. There are things that you can say about your family members, but don't let somebody else try to say those same things, right? Yeah. So here's some things that we need to discuss and talk about in terms of this great land of ours, the United States of America. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, which did what for who? It freed black people from slavery. Right? It freed black people from slavery. In 1920, what happened for women? They got the right to vote. They got the right to vote. A date I would like for you to add, if you can just write this down, because I know you're writing all these dates down anyway, is 1924. Native Americans became citizens of the United States of America. So 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. 1920, women get the right to vote. 1924, Native Americans become citizens of the United States. And then in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was signed, doing what? Ending segregation, eliminating discrimination. 1964. We'll come back to that date in just a second. Another date I'd like for you to write down is 1978. 1978. Native Americans get the right to practice their religion. 1978. And then in 1990, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which did what for whom?
Give equal job opportunities to people that have disabilities.
All right, so people with disabilities have the same equal rights as everyone else to access to goods, jobs, services, and money, to public buildings, to public accommodations, all the things that everybody else has, right? Now, I want to pay particular attention to a couple of things here. One is, when were the slaves, the people who were held in bondage in the system of slavery, when were those people released from that bondage? 1863.
Slavery was still being practiced long after that.
I would say certainly forms of slavery were being practiced long after that. I'd also say that Texas, I don't know if you've heard of this holiday called Juneteenth. It is the celebration of the slaves, people held in the system of slavery in Texas for 2 additional years longer. So they did not get their freedom until 1865. All right? So I want you to pay attention to that. So no, we'll just move on to the next piece. So there's a conversation that you'll often hear had, particularly about Native Americans, and it's this concept of this conversation about historical trauma. Has anyone ever heard that terminology before? Historical trauma? Yes, no? Okay, cool. So historical trauma is, we'll talk about it. How many people have had something stolen from you? Raise your hand if you've had something stolen. All right, cool. What did you have stolen, sir?
Plenty of things. CDs, I don't know.
Okay, CDs, all right.
Computer.
A computer, all right.
Car.
A car, okay, cell phone. Purse. What was yours, ma'am?
Car.
A car, okay, sweet, sweet, sweet. Can I use your cars as an example? All right, cool. Would you know your car if you saw it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Did you have your car stolen too?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Would you know your car as well?
Yeah.
Okay, and you know your car. What kind of car was it?
1997 Dodge Neon.
Dodge Neon 97?
It was a Pontiac Grand Am. It
Pa-
was a 19, I don't know.
Pontiac Grand Am, but you would know it if you saw it, right? Okay, and you?
86 Buick Regal.
Okay, a Regal. Okay, cool. So you know your cars. So let's say you come home one day from a hard day's work and you see your car, your stolen car, in your neighbor's driveway. What would you do?
Call the cops.
So you call the cops.
I'm gonna go over and ask.
Oh, so you go over and ask. You'll be like, is that my car? What are they going to say?
Possibly no.
Possibly
But I mean,
no.
if it depends, because they can possibly have the same car, maybe it's a
Possibly.
newer car. But if you see something that belongs to you inside the vehicle.
Like the sticker with your name on it that says glamorous is on the back, and you like, that's, okay, so you just going to go over there, and what are they going to say?
If they say no, then I'm gonna call the cops. But
Okay, so you go call the cops, all right, and what are you going to do?
Call the cops.
You're going to call the cops. So the cops are going to show up, and the cops are going to do, probably for you, what they do for me when I call them. They're going to take a report, and then go back to doing whatever they were doing. So I'm left with this little card. So now what? I called the police, they took a report, now what?
We have to wait until they.
So I wait until whenever,
Car might disappear again.
all right?
No.
So what do I do now?
I'd go over to my neighbors then and be like, hey,
So you go over to your neighbor and you say what?
that's my car, where'd you get it?
You say, that's my car, where'd you get it? And they say,
Ain't your car.
Or if
that's
you
not your
want-
car?
Well, if you want to know, you don't have to tell them it's your car, you can just say, where'd you get this car?
Or you can just say, where'd you get the car? At the end of the day, are you leaving with that car?
No.
Probably not. So are you frustrated at this point?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, somebody might say, well, I'm going to go over and take my car. So you go over and you go try to take the car, and what do you think you get met with? Oh, where are you hanging out? I was going to say resistance, but she said a gun. Right? So you're going to get met with a resistance. It might be a gun, and blah, blah, blah. And you could go that route, which means you bring more people, and then they bring more people, and then you bring... So you got this whole all-out war over this car. Or the next logical thing would be to do what?
Take the spare set of keys, unlock the door, and drive away.
Okay, take the extra spare key, whatever, okay? But they had dogs. They got mastiffs up in the yard.
Well, you just take the vehicle registration.
So you take the vehicle registration and what?
Police that prove that it's.
So you go to the police and you prove it, and the police say, you know what, man, we've done what we were supposed to do, which was take a report. So we encourage you to go to court. So you go to court and you try to sue to get your car back. And you know, they're standing there, you're pleading your case, you got all your paperwork and stuff, all your deeds, all the stuff to the car. You stand there in front of the judge, and the judge looks at you and says, you know what, the statute of limitations for your ownership is up. This car belongs to your neighbor. How do you feel?
Taken advantage.
Taken advantage of. So you're frustrated, you're mad. All right? So now you go back home, you resign yourself that this car is not going to belong to you. But every day you walk outside of your door and you see
Your car.
your car.
But you're
And then a few months pass, and it's now summertime, and the neighborhood decides they're going to have a car show.
Oh, what?
So your neighbor walks across the street, knocks on your door, and said, "We're going to have a neighborhood car show, and I was wondering if you could help me clean up my car. If you could help me polish the car." How do you feel about that neighbor inviting you to come?
Slam the door.
You slam the door in his face. Do you want to participate in this car show? No, you do not want to participate in this car show. As a matter of fact, you want to blow the whole thing up, right? That is called historical trauma. Can you imagine living in a world where everything that you look at, you recognize that it was stolen from you? Can you realize what it might be like to be asked to participate in a system that was designed to destroy you? Historical trauma. But part of the problem with this concept of historical trauma as it relates to what has happened and is happening to Native Americans is that it gives it the perspective that it was in the past. But what we're talking about is stuff that is happening every single day. And so when I see Native brothers and sisters, I give them much respect because the hell that they were going through is the same hell that they're going through today. It hasn't stopped. And so when we talk about, and I use the example of hedge clippers, if you saw your hedge, but we substituted that for cars. And so the idea that it was stolen and you try to take it back and you get it, what does this start to do to your psyche? Do you feel really good about yourself? No. Do you feel really good about participating in society? No. As a matter of fact, you have a hate and a disdain that you cannot understand or describe to people. Right? So this is a concept that we should understand. 1863, what happened? Emancipation Proclamation. 1964, what happened? Desegregation. Giving what? What was desegregation? Equal rights in every aspect of living, right? We actually had to have some additions because there's some stuff that they left out. And they found that they left them out when the racists and the haters of injustice started using these things. They said, "Oh yeah, we got to add this and we got to add that," like equal housing and not using race as a basis for discrimination and loans and all that kind of stuff. But we'll talk about that stuff at another time. So 101 years has passed since the slaves were freed. And guess what people were saying in 1964 as Dr. King was struggling for this stuff? Guess what they said? "Martin, you're moving too fast." and Dr. King said, Reverend Dr. King says, "Justice delayed is justice denied." How many more years? What happens in 100 years? What do you think happened in 100 years from 1863 to 1964? What kinds of things were going on in the world? What was the larger context? What's that?
It was changing. I mean, it was still going on in its own way still, basically, even with 100 years. When slaves being free, they really...
But let's not even talk about that. What is happening in the world in that 100 years?
A couple of world wars.
We had 2 world wars. Who do you think fought in those world wars? People who didn't have equal rights. Right? People were born. People were married. They paid taxes. They contributed in a country where they were not equal. And so when I look at the problems that are facing particularly African Americans in America, I'm not concerned. All I know is that they just need 101 years to catch up. In that 101 years, grandparents had property when other grandparents couldn't get property. And that 101 years, grandparents could vote where other grandparents couldn't vote. And so when we think about wherever it is that we are, we can't take for granted this 101 year head start that some folks had that other folks did not get a chance to have. And so when I think about my cousin, I always wanted to be like my older cousin. When I was 9, he was 13. But I was surprised to find out that when I became 13, he wasn't. But I'll catch up to him one day. Some of you got the joke, some of you didn't. And so when we think about this, we have to take in the context of both of these events to really start to understand people's behavior. In a situation where folks did not have equal access, it's a delayed development. And we have to create inroads for folks to, quote unquote, catch up. All right? Cool. You guys don't want to know all that stuff. That's the heady stuff. Come on, Drake, get to the good stuff. I'll do this and then we'll do another activity. Why is it that deer get hit by cars? You ever thought about that? Why do deer get hit by cars?
They get stuck in.
Because they get stuck in the headlights. So the headlights have some mystical
It's
power
like hypnosis.
that it's like hypnosis, okay? Anyone seen Bambi? The movie Bambi? Anyone seen it? Or The Yearling? Anyone seen The Yearling? You guys haven't seen The Yearling? Oh, you gotta see. It's a cry movie. It's just good. Kids love it. I don't know why kids love it. So in Bambi or The Yearling, is there a part in the movie where Buck, Big Buck, Bambi's father, sits Bambi down and says, "Bambi, this is a Ford F-150. Be careful." Or where Dawn, the fawn, Bambi's mom, comes and says, "Bambi, this is a Toyota Yaris. Do not be concerned with this." Why do deer get hit by cars? Guess what? They don't know what cars are. It is outside of their context. It is an out-of-context problem. Another example of an out-of-context problem would be 9/11. I don't know of anybody who imagined that people would use an airplane full of people as a missile to destroy buildings. That was outside of our context. I was teaching that day, and I had the whole school actually shut down as we watched these things unfold. We saw the second plane fly into the Twin Towers. And I'm trying to explain this to my kids, and I can't comprehend it myself. The only thing I felt from my kids was the sadness that I knew that was going to come as a result of this, right? And I was praying. I was like, please let this be white boys again, please. Right? Because Oklahoma was the first time, and it was white boys, and I was relieved. Why was I relieved? Because I knew the hammer was coming down if it was anybody that was brown. Because here's the funny thing about all of this stuff. When Oklahoma City happened, there were no warnings about white dudes in trucks. And that's who blew up the building, the white dudes in the trucks. But we'll talk about that more later in just a second. So out of context. But now, flying planes in the buildings is now in our what? It's in our context. And not only is that in our context, we're starting to think about all the other stuff that could possibly happen, that will probably never happen, but we're trying to put all of that stuff in our context. Because when it's an out of context problem, we get surprised. We're reactive. We're not prepared. But when things are in our context, then we're prepared. We're not surprised. We know what resources to gather. We know what to do when it's in our context. And part of what's happening when we have all these folks coming from different places, or in many cases, leaving the United States to go to other places, we have these cultural clashes which are actually out of context problems. I'm not familiar with the context, so I make mistakes. I do goofy stuff. I don't say. This was one of the things I thought was funny. They had elections in Afghanistan, and they used their thumbprint as for voting, right? And so they showed these pictures of all these Afghanis going like this with their thumbprint, and for Afghanis, that's the same as the middle finger. So they're like, right? And because people didn't understand the context, we blasted all this stuff, and they're giving us the middle finger, and we're like, oh, they love us, right? So there's that. So. Yeah. So when things are out of our context, we're fearful of them, we're shocked, we're unprepared, we're unaware, we're reactive, and we're accidental. When we put these things in context, we're courageous, we're thoughtful, we're prepared, we're aware, we're proactive, and we're purposeful. Right? So for many of us, I'll just do the experiment, and then we'll talk about this stuff. So if you could pass those down the back. So what I'd like for you to do is I've just handed you a card, and on the top of the card are groups in American society. Right? So African Americans, European Americans, Latino, Latina Americans, Asian Americans, disabled Americans, Native Americans. Given the limitations of the physical space on this card, I could not add all the groups. I've just given you a sampling, right? So I could not add all the groups, but I'm giving you a sampling. And so those groups are across the top in gray, and across the side, on the left-hand side, are groups that try to give you information about the groups across the top. All right? Whether you believe them or not is not the question, but what kind of conversations did those people on the side try to have with you about the groups across the top? And what I want you to do is I want you to put a plus if the group on the left tried to give you information about the group across the top that was positive. If they gave you negative information, I want you to put a minus. If you never talked about it, it was never something you discussed, I want you to put a 0. You can have pluses and minuses in the same box, but the size of the plus and the size of the minus determines how much you learned. So a big plus means there's a lot of positive, a little minus means there's a little negative. All right? I want you to do that for each group.
Are you okay if we write on them?
Yeah, those are yours. You can write on those.
Oh.
And they're a little slick, so it might take a little extra effort to write on them, but those belong to you. Give you another minute or so. And stop right where you are. I'd like for you to get in groups of 4 or 5. Get in groups of 4 or 5, and I want you to kind of share whatever you feel comfortable sharing about your car. I'll give you about 7 minutes or so. Groups of 4 or 5.
Yeah, I know, it's just like, I just started scratching. Yeah. Got nowhere.
I have a lot of